in all the seasons of our life, we never stop learning. I'm 47 now, and I thought by 47 I would figured everything out and just kind of cruise. My kids are in teenage years. They're going to be soon off by themselves. I'm going to have to enjoy empty nest. Oh my gosh, every day is learning. Because the world is changing, and it's not as simple as things used to be. But I reflected on this, that in fact, that's the experience of human life from the get-go. That babies, when they're born, they don't have a lot in their system to know how to navigate the world. In fact, their brains can't fully understand their surroundings. They're not born with like a lot of animals with this instinct to know what to be afraid of, what food to eat. We have to be taught everything. It's kind of like, we don't have the skills to navigate, the marketplace when we're born. We don't know how to get around and do what we need to do. We're born with just bare bones. Yeah. In fact, there's this one guy named John Medina, and he has an organization called Teleris Institute, teaching young parents to realize what's going on in the brain of the little kids. And I never understood this, but kids, even 3 or 4 years old, I would throw my kids in the air, and I'd throw them in the air, and they'd be so happy, and I would catch them, they go, again, right? I throw them in the air, again. My back is killing me. The 15th time, again. And I'm like, come on, haven't you figured this out by now? Because they're learning how the world works. They're orientating themselves. Gravity, we just assume everybody knows everything kind of falls down. Kids don't know that. They have to test it out again and again. That's why when they see you, babies, when they see you, they're like, and you play peekaboo and they start crying. Because you've disappeared. They don't know if you're coming back. Yeah. So how do you know how this works? Not only by testing and trying, you learn by instruction. You learn by experience. You learn by other people saying, this is how to do things. Still true. If you're a doctor or you are a nurse and you go to a new hospital, you think you know everything, but you don't. They have different policies. They have different values. They do different things. And you're like, it's kind of freaky. You're learning. It feels like you're learning things all over again. Maybe you have things to teach, but it's still a learning experience. I get this about we have a lot of lawyers in our context. And a lot of times I'll ask them, so I got a friend who's got this issue, and they want some criminal defense. And I'm not a criminal lawyer. But you're a lawyer, right? I have no idea how to defend somebody. It's like, but you went to law school. You passed the bar. Sometimes we ask them these very simple questions, and I'm a this kind of lawyer, I'm a that kind of lawyer. You go to a new law firm, and guess what? You have to pick up. You have to learn constantly. If you're a chef and you go into a new kitchen, guess what? You have to learn the layout. You have to learn which stove works well. You have to anything you do. It's so helpful to have a sense of orientation. You can't just assume that, number one, you can wing it. Number two, that everything is going to stay the same. And so one of the things that I was thinking about was, for many of us who grew up outside of, who not even in the church, or grew up in a world where the church and God kind of had this picture of life, and it's not that anymore. And we feel ourselves very confused without a sense of orientation. Where is God? How does he feel? How do we talk to him? How do we pray? What does it mean that we worship him? How is the stuff that is deep inside our hearts supposed to engage him? Many times it's very hard, especially if you're looking through the book of Leviticus. What the heck am I supposed to do? How do I relate to God? One of the places where we find this beautiful orientation to actually talk to God, to engage him, to learn not just how to praise, how to pray, how to have a personal relationship with God, but actually, in many ways, what the orientation of how to live often is found in a very beautiful way in the book of Psalms. We're going to spend this whole summer in the book of Psalms. As I was wrestling with this, it took me a long time. I prepared a whole track, a line of sermons for the book of Galatians, because I wanted to walk us through the grace and the gospel. And there's a part of me that really loves to walk people through the scriptures. I never had that when I was younger. Most of the sermons I had were like repeats and just little clips of topical stuff. But when I really saw the depth and the weight of God's word, it changed my life. And I always love to be able to do that. But we have a diverse community, and we have seasons where we go through topical stuff. We just finished up a whole season on the enemies of the heart. Good stuff. dealing with life application things, greed, guilt, jealousy, and anger, stuff that are very relevant, which drew upon the truth of Scripture. But, when you're growing to be somebody who's spiritually mature, which this all of our deep desires to be, you want to be able to encounter God and really understand and have access to the Scriptures. So, when I first started as a pastor, I went on a 7-year course. I was going to preach through the Bible in 7 years. I made it through years 3.5 because I moved on from Tacoma to New York. But my congregation were gracious enough to let me walk them through, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy in 1 year, and then the Gospels in the next year, and then the epistles, and so on and so forth. And I wasn't able to finish the way I wanted to, but there was something beautiful about it, something so formative, where they still remember and talk about, wow, I really learned who God was through those slow, steady, just you walk through the whole Scriptures, preaching-wise. Now, we're not going to necessarily go there right away. Maybe if you'll let me in years, I would love to do that in a more extended way. But I feel like one place we can start is jump into the book of Psalms. And I'll explain to you why. And we'll spend this next 3 months, okay, starting today, but June, July, and August, in the book of Psalms. And we're going to touch here and there because the Psalms are, in many ways, reflective of life. It's multifaceted. It deals with the highs and the lows. The times when you're so confused, the times when you're just so exuberant. What do? Where is God? How to talk to him, how to engage him through all of that. And in many ways, I'm really hoping that it'll give us a little access point from which, when we look at the Scriptures, we're not just taking little bits and pieces here, but we're seeing how this works in a more interactive way. I love the Psalms, and I didn't realize why until I reflected a little on it. If you've been walking with Christ for a little while, sometimes, not everybody does this, but I've talked to a lot of people and they do. You get caught up with a certain section of the Scriptures. There was a time in my life where I was really trying to understand something, and I spent months just doing my quiet times in the book of Romans. And if you ever try your quiet times in the book of Romans, it's boring, man. It's so boring. But I was trying to get something. I was hungry for something. I had to process something. So Romans was in my back pocket for a little while. And then there was a whole other season where I was stuck in Genesis. I was reading Genesis over and over again. I was actually, when I first came back to Christ after college, I was stuck in the book of Judges. And it's really funny that there's different seasons sometimes in my life. God has brought me through the book of Psalms several times. And I find often it was when I was really struggling. I didn't know what was going on in my heart. I didn't know how to engage God. I didn't know how to pray through certain things. I remember one time, this is before I met Yun, a few years before I met Yun. I got dumped really bad. I thought this woman was going to be my wife. I told my parents, this is somebody, for the first time, this is somebody I would pursue to be a wife. They gave me their okay, and then she dumped me. Yeah. That pain, she dumped me on Valentine's. Okay, this is the worst pain for any guy, right? I really pray that you never experience this. She dumped me on Valentine's. And I didn't have a guy friend to talk to. They were all with their girlfriends, right? And I was like, oh, and I didn't God, why would you allow this to happen? And I'm sitting there wrestling this. I didn't know how to talk to him about that with him. And in the midst of that, I was pouring through the Psalms. And the parts of I felt so betrayed, the Psalms about God, I feel so betrayed. It just came alive. And about trusting him, that he knows my heart, that he's got a future for me. It's really interesting that I learned how to pray through grief by walking through some of the Psalms. There were points in time where I remember I feel like I was being really attacked. And I was trying to do everything right, but nobody could see that. And I couldn't defend myself. And only God knew. And those are the times the Psalms where some of the laments meant so much. There were times when I was so dry. And I don't know, why am I so dry? And I don't know how to get out of it. Do I just take a break from God and come back? And actually those were some of the times where the Psalms were talking about about panting after God's presence and longing for him. It made no sense for me, but it taught me how to pray through those times. And so I find that the Psalms are so significant. They've taught me in many ways. They've been an orientation manual for me about how to walk through life, the tough stuff, the beautiful stuff, how to really enjoy God when things are going well, but actually how to stay with him when things are not. I find it really interesting that Jesus, when he's on the cross, and he's going through this, body-shattering, soul-wrenching experience of being betrayed by the people that he loved and served, crucified on a cross for their sins, what is he quoting? What is on his mind? How is he getting through God? How is he orienting himself along the way? He quotes, two last of the 7 words are from Psalms. Stuff that he was taught as a boy. How to pray through. How to trust God even before the fear of going to sleep. What the experience of abandonment feels like. And how to trust God through that. Isn't that interesting? That Jesus actually reflects on the Psalms during that season, the difficult part of his life. And if you realize, Psalms is the most quoted book from the New Testament, from the Old Testament. In other words, in the New Testament, they all look backwards. Isaiah's number 2. You'd be surprised. Psalms is the number 1 quoted book in the New Testament. Why? Isn't that interesting? Psalms is not just the fact that it's talking about a personal experience of God, but in the Psalms you realize that there's a pointing toward a king who will come, who will finish, and who will make all things right, not just in personal lives, but in the story of Israel. There's so much here that we will find that will orient us to have a life with God, ourselves, and together as a people of God. So we're going to jump into the Psalms. We're going to spend a summer in the Psalms. 12 sermons, and there's 150. We're not going to spend 150 weeks in the book of Psalms. That would be a little hard. It would be hard for me, too, because I couldn't do Psalm 119 in one sermon. But we will do, because that's the longest book in the Bible. But we will cover through. And I'm just going to give you a quick introduction to the Psalms. I'm going to get into Psalm 1, which in of itself is a kind of introduction to the book of Psalms. So just really quick, the Psalms itself has 5 books. Now, it doesn't really show you that easily because they didn't have a lot of tools to do so. They didn't have title pages and so they couldn't waste it on there. This is how you know, because at the end of each of these chapters, 41, 72, 89, 106, and 150, there is a specific phrasing, a doxology, a praise of God that repeats itself. And that's how it's understood that, there's a structure in the book of Psalms. And in fact, there is even a little bit of a progression in the book of Psalms. So Psalm 1 starts off, most of those Psalms are from David, King David, at a time when the king is in control and so on and so forth. And there is a lot of good, there's a lot of bad, and there's a lot of personal stuff. But as it goes and moves forward, it kind of even follows the story of exile, where the people of God, they sinned. They made mistakes in their life. They were wondering, where is God? They were living out the consequences of how they lived. And where is God in the midst of that? And as it turns around, eventually, there's a return. That God, all of his promises became true. And it ends with amazing praise, amazing fulfillment. This is wonderful. It goes through the whole gamut of difficulty, pain, confusion, even feeling the weight of your own consequences individually as a person. It teaches the people of God how to confess and experience forgiveness, how to praise and experience joy, and teaches them all the way through, even in a historical way. It is a massive, beautiful book that I don't have time to go through 150 sermons, but I'm hoping that we'll get a flavor of that. I'm going to preach a sermon on a lament psalm, okay? Basically a lament psalm is, God, life sucks. Yeah, that's a lament psalm, right? We're going to go through a psalm on praise and on how to walk through and engage God, how to be oriented to God. And I'm really praying that we're going to come out of this connected a little deeper, both individually and as community. So that was all my intro. Take a deep breath. We're going to jump right into Psalm 1, because Psalm 1 in and of itself is a bit of an introduction. It opens up the rest of what the psalm is going to be and how to approach the psalms. So it starts off by saying, "Blessed is the one who does not walk in step with the wicked, or stand in the way of sinners, or sit in the company of mockers." So it starts off with this word, blessed. If you hear the word blessed, what do you think? The word blessed these days is used by boxers. I think Floyd Mayweather, all these guys, they're always talking about blessed life. Even I don't think I've ever heard Mike Tyson talk about it, but they use this word blessed in a very kind of I'm blessed. I'm living large, right? Somebody who's really happy, everything is going their way, they have money, they have a posse, everything is awesome, a charmed life. That's the American version of blessed. You're not sad. Everything is working your way, and everybody wants to be you, right? Well, this language of blessed we use all the time. You don't hear me using that word a lot. If you hear me, I don't use that word a lot, partly because it's very misunderstood. I try to find other ways. Or people are like, what are you talking about? Let me give you a little description of what blessed from the scriptures looks like. The word blessed does describe happy. Okay? There's a certain kind of joy. There's a certain kind of exuberance that comes with the word blessed, right? It's a good word. You want to be blessed. When you say, I'm blessed, it's a recognition God has been good to you. But it's a word a little deeper than that. It's not a word to describe happiness because of circumstances. It kind of describes that there's a lot of good things coming your way, but it's actually saying that it's not the external circumstances. It's something internal. That you have something in you that allows you to go through even the most difficult, all of the things of life, and experience a sense of peace, wholeness, that gives you both the ability and the guidance to go through all of that to a place of fulfillment. There is a sense of fulfillment in my life. Even when I don't feel it in the circumstances right at this moment, I know things are going to work out swimmingly, beautifully. And that's what it means to be blessed. It makes a little more sense when you look at Jesus and he's talking about blessed are those who mourn. How can you be blessed when you're weeping because you lost somebody, when you're weeping because the world is a mess? How can you be blessed? Because in that context, internally you know that you're in connection with a God who is going to fix it, who's going to comfort, who's going to fix the world. And so you can be blessed even when the circumstances are not. Blessed is the one who does not walk in step with the wicked or stand in the way of sinners, or sit in company of mockers. Somebody who doesn't have to follow the pattern of the world, and even in the injustice of the world, the wickedness of the world, and actually has the internal ability to say, no, I stand apart from that, because I know how to live, and it's different from that. If you see this, there's a progressive identification of happening here, where it starts off where you're just walking in the way. You're doing the same kind of thing. You're in the same kind of vicinity as the people who live a certain way, which is destructive and ugly and you know is not right. It's not healthy. Then after a while, it seems so attractive, so you stand there. Yeah, you're talking with them. You're in conversation. You're hanging out. And before you know it, you're sitting. The word for sit in that context describes they are your posse. You belong in that group. Okay? It's a word for instruction. You know how, like, when the disciples, they would learn from Jesus, what would they do? They would sit at his feet. Okay? Because why? They belong to Jesus as someone who's learning. They are being oriented about how to live as Jesus' disciple. Saying, blessed are the ones who know that isn't the way to live. A life of wickedness, a life of selfishness, a life where you're just making your own way. And you're hanging out with people like that. True blessing does not come that way. Where you're progressively, more and more, finding yourselves connected with a people who don't know God and they don't follow him. Okay? The true blessing comes and is described by one who delights in the law of the Lord and in his law meditates day and night. So, there are people who are living a certain way, and completely opposite to the way that God would have us live. A different instruction manual, right? A selfish manual, a violent manual, a manual of dishonesty and destruction. Well, someone who's blessed has the internal faith and ability to actually to separate themselves and then attach themselves to God and his way of living. Who delights in the law of the Lord. Now, when you think of law, what do you think of? Especially lawyers, you're thinking of like rules. You're thinking of, ethics. You're thinking of all these kinds of things that have been codified. You're thinking of all the stuff in the Old Testament. But here, a better way to describe this is, law of the Lord describes a way of living that God instructs. Okay, that God says, "This is who I am. This is how you should live." An instruction manual, an instruction that comes from the people who live God's way. Okay? So, blessed are those who delight in the instruction of the Lord, who are orientating their life figuring out what is the way to live by what they are hearing and seeing that's coming from God. How about you? Do you guys like instruction manuals? Okay. When you buy something, I know some people do. There's geeks in this room, I know. I can point them out to you if you want, who sit there and read the instruction manuals, right? When you go to the airport and you go sit on a plane and the flight attendants are like, okay, everybody, let's pull out your manual. Who does that? I just turn on my headphones and I'm like, I'm gone. I'm in La La Land, right? God forbid that we have a problem. I'm like, I don't know how to use this door, because I don't like instruction manuals. I'm horrible. I'll just start playing around, and I'll sometimes mess things up. I'm really bad at that. Even the IKEA stuff, I've destroyed some things because I don't follow the instruction manual. I got all these pieces left over. Where are they from, right? Well, if you're like that, guess what? That's how we approach life. I'm not talking about the game of life. I'm talking about life. A lot of people think that there is no instruction manual. It doesn't come with an instruction manual. It sounds so wise, right? Okay. Who told you how to deal with, especially if you don't have parents or if parents are not even absent, a broken heart? I couldn't talk to my parents. She dumped me, Dad. He's like, what'd you do? And I could explain to him all these things. I had no instruction manual. What do you do? How to figure out, what do I do with the rest of my life? Is this the right person? How do I parent this child? Life doesn't come with an instruction manual, especially if something happens, a tragedy, and you just weren't ready for it, right? You would think to yourself that a lot of people say, we don't have an instruction manual to ourselves. We don't even know our own hearts. We don't know how our body's supposed to work. How do we take care of it? And so we're trying to find that. Well, guess what? This language of the law of the Lord is saying there is an instruction manual. There is a source of instruction. There is a way to live, okay? And it'll bear out in consequences. This is something that we have to hear. Our generation refuses this down to the core. Our generation says there is no right or wrong. You just play it your own way. And actually, God says no. You try to do it that way, and your life will not be blessed. You will be going from place to place, and you'll feel homeless. You will not have a sense of direction. You will hit your quarter-century crisis, your midlife crisis, your before the grave crisis, and you will be so confused. Life doesn't come with a manual that somebody gives you, but there is an orienting source. It's not just the book of Psalms. It's not just the law of the Lord in terms of the Old Testament. It's actually all of who God said he is in his word, revealed in how people have lived out his word. There is an instruction. There is a source. There is something that orients you. God does show us how to live, how to know him, if we're willing to look. It's interesting that the next thing that we see is not only a description of the wicked and the blessed. It's a description of what does a blessed life look like? Somebody who follows the instruction of the Lord. And that next thing is described in the picture. It's the picture of a tree that has been transplanted from a different area into a different soil, where the soil now is located right by a stream. Verse 4 says, verse 3, that person is like a tree planted by streams of water, which yields its fruit in season, and whose leaf does not wither. Whatever they do prospers. This is the bearing. Ultimately, those who follow the orientation, the instruction, a way to how to live, how to be with God, and how to live in the world that comes from the scriptures, that comes from God, this person actually is like a tree that doesn't have to be afraid when the drought comes, because there's a water source right next to it. That it always has something within it that gives it the energy to be green, the vibrancy, ability to live. And ultimately, at the right time, when the times of the season of fruit bearing has a wonderful fruit bearing season. This is a promise to an agrarian culture that says, if you follow the instruction patterns of the Lord, you trust in God, and you do it this way, you walk with him. In the long run, even through the times of crisis and confusion, this is what bears out. Something within you gives you this ability to overcome. It gives you the ability to stay true, and there's life that flows. This tree idea comes from Genesis chapter 3, Genesis chapter 2 and 3. When God created human beings, Adam and Eve, he put them in a garden. And there were two trees there, the tree of life, that if they would eat from it, it would make their lives full forever, right? Or the tree of knowledge, good and evil. That if you ate that, there would be a form of death. That tree of knowledge, good and evil is, I will not follow the way of the Lord, the instruction of the Lord. You know, it's interesting, in the temple, inside, they would have this kind of tree imagery, right? Because that's what it means. That this is an expression of whether you want to do it God's way or you go your own way, okay? Whether you'll have a progressive identification with, I am of God's people, I'll do it his way, I'll learn how to live his way, or actually you'll choose an alternate path. This tree is a reminder that ultimately, this is what it looks like to have access to the tree of life. Even when things are going tough, you know what to do, okay? You know how to hold on. Something within you is sourcing integrity, is sourcing faithfulness, okay? You get into a big fight with your spouse, and you're so tempted to cheat, but you know something within you. It's not about what kind of person am I or right and wrong. You know that there's something right and something good. And if you last through the season of fighting, there's something better on the other side that God has for you. You trust him. You stay when something horrible happens. You don't understand why. God, why would you allow this to happen? You are able to trust him through it. It's interesting that he uses the language of that tree is actually a tree of, it's technically, in the original language, it's a tree that's been transplanted. No longer are you part of this soil that doesn't have access to this living water. Now you've been put into this soil, right by a steady stream. That how does this tree stay vibrant? How does it have life, even during the drought? Because there's water source right by. It can tap that water. What does it mean? When you give your life to Christ, and this is not just about doing, learning about how to live as a Christian and acting like a Christian, saying blessed all the time, every 3 words. When you really begin to give your heart and follow and choose Christ, because you've allowed him to come in and you've received him as Lord, the Spirit of God lives in you. Something is inside you, someone, that actually teaches you the way to live, that actually empowers you. You don't just follow rules, that guides you, that gives you strength to last, to be faithful, to be right, upright, through every season. When things get bad, you can go dive deep into, your roots can go deeper into the ground because you know there's water there. I found this to be true in my life. The times when things were so bad, and I just, there have been a few moments actually in my life where I wanted to just quit it because I just didn't have energy. I didn't have hope. And I was this close to just turning back on my life. There's twice in my life I was there. And in the midst of that, God kicked in because I turned to him. I remembered some of these stories of the depression that David went through and how he turned to God, and God moved and caught him. I went through several seasons of that. This is the joy of knowing God and doing it his way. Someone else is there to pick you up, to strengthen you, to guide you, to watch over you. When you give your heart and you identify with him. So I think it's really sad, and I think it's really demonic, actually. When somebody's going through something really tough, when everything in the scriptures and everything in the experience of the church has always said, run after God, go deeper, trust him more, they actually turn their back. It sounds wise. I've been trying this thing, it's not working, forget it, right? But actually, that's not wise at all. There's a lot of people, when tragedy hits, instead of trusting God, saying, God, what are you doing through this? Okay? And I've been through my fair share, but not as bad as some others. But I know what it tastes like and what it feels like. It's so easy to say, God, I thought everything was supposed to be, blessed, and I don't want anything to do with this. Rather than trusting God more, going deeper into who he is, talking to him through it, wrestling through it, even expressing all of your pain to God, we just shut that door, okay? But a plant that's been transplanted by the river does not move. it just goes deeper. It's like a fish. Fish are very wise, you know. When there's a storm, there's like a hurricane on the water, there's crazy stuff happening, fish don't like it. But fish don't look for an island to jump onto, because that island at least is solid, right? There's no turbulence on the island. They'll die. Fish just go deeper into the ocean. This is the wisdom of what it means that the Psalms was going to teach us, about how to trust God through all of the difficulties, especially when life gets really turbulent. Okay? Blessed are those. They are like a tree that even in the heat of the summer, guess what? Their leaves are still green, that there's fruit in season. On the other hand, there's a different picture for the wicked. Not so the wicked. The wicked is described as those who don't follow God, and in fact they have an effect on other people because they're so selfish. Negative effect. Not so the wicked. They are like chaff that the wind blows away. You guys know what chaff is? Okay, so this is agrarian culture. I have to unpack this a bit. So these days, we know wheat because it has gluten, right? The nasty stuff. Most people are realizing that a lot of people have gluten intolerances. Well, back then, they actually didn't care about gluten. They cared about chaff. Because these days, we get our wheat that's all processed in flour, but back then, we came with these stalks. In fact, when we go to India, that's what they're doing. The ladies, okay, India is very sexist. Men never touch the wheat. But the ladies are sitting there in their free time separating with their hands the chaff, the stuff that you can't eat, and the kernel, right? So and then they make this pile with the good stuff and the bad stuff. How do you get rid of the chaff? How do you separate the chaff? Back then they would just fling it into the air, the wind would come, and the chaff is lighter than the kernel, and it would separate because the wind would take it. You get a pile of chaff over there as you keep doing this, and the kernel's on the floor. It's saying God, through life, will separate those who follow his instruction manual because they are identified with him. They trust him. They've given them his heart, even through the tough times. He'll separate them. The righteous who delight in his law and meditate on his law day and night, and who follow it, versus those who follow their own way. The wicked will be like chaff. The wind blows away. Okay? It is a language of separation. It is a language of judgment. Therefore, the wicked will not stand in the judgment, nor sinners in the assembly of the righteous. Okay? And it follows and finishes, the psalm finishes with a reminder of why that's the case. Because it's the Lord who watches over the way of the righteous. When you've trusted God and you transplanted your heart and you're digging deeper into not only his instruction manual, but his presence, guess what? God is with you. He guides you. Okay? You'll see in the stories of not in the stories, but in the Psalms, that they'll echo your very own experiences as you trust and you walk with him. They'll not only voice it for you and give you ability to pray it out, but it'll lead you through that. But the wicked, they don't have God's guidance. They don't have God's presence. They don't have God's promise. All there's left is destruction. It is a black and white separation that's being described here. So as we walk through the Psalms, I'm going to encourage you to kind of pay attention to this. You're going to see God point out, kind of, this is who I am. This is what you were made for. This is what it means. How do you go through these kinds of circumstances? This is what I've done in the past. And it is a kind of an instruction manual for our hearts to engage him. It'll give us voice, how to pray. You know, for example, we might even go through one of these Psalms, the imprecatory Psalms. I didn't know how to voice anger to God. Yeah. And I read David, so frustrated at the people, the wicked people around him. He says stuff like, God, break their teeth. Okay? There's one psalm that just still scares me. I don't know how to do with. And it's about put their children, these horrible, invaders, on through the point of spears. And I'm like, what would drive somebody to pray that? But you know what I realized? I've never known how to voice my anger to God in prayer. I don't know how to process that. It's the Psalms that taught us. But it won't just help us to voice that. It'll give us an instruction how to walk through it, like it did with Jesus, like it does for David, and even for Paul. All the people of the church have gone to the Psalms in many ways as a version of an instruction manual, as is with the rest of the scriptures. But would you bow your heads with me as we begin to pray?